The glass paperweight, a custom award from Commissioner Sean Davis for preventing a major environmental shutdown at our plant last year, shattered against the concrete floor as Sarah Jenkins from HR placed the box on my desk. I looked down at the broken shards of glass, then up at Julian Cole, the kid standing in my doorway. He wore a crisp navy suit that still had the tailoring chalk marks on the cuffs, and his eyes were already scanning the dimensions of my corner office, calculating where he would place his mahogany bookcase. Sarah wouldn't look me in the eye. She just kept her hands on the cardboard banker's box, murmuring something about the board's decision and the need for modern management. Julian stepped forward, extending a hand that I didn't take. "I'm Julian," he said, his voice dripping with the confidence of someone who has never actually had to sign their name on a federal liability waiver. "Top of my class at Stanford. The board wants to bring fresh analytical frameworks to our compliance department. I'm 55 years old. For 15 years, I had been the shield between Valiant Manufacturing Co. and every regulatory agency that had the power to lock our gates. I knew every weld, every chemical valve, and every inspector in the state. I knew their birthdays, their coffee preferences, and which ones would write a citation if they saw a speck of dust on the safety valves." "The nameplate on the door slides right out," Julian added, his fingers already tracing the brass trim. "I'll have the maintenance crew swap it for mine by the afternoon." I didn't say a word. I opened my desk drawer, took my personal leather-bound logbook, the one containing 15 years of detailed notes on every inspector and every regulatory loophole in the county, and placed it in the box. Sarah awkwardly helped me pack my family photos. "The federal compliance audit starts at 4 p.m. today," I said quietly as I picked up the box. "We have it under control," Sarah said, adjusting the pens on what was no longer my desk. "Do you?" I asked. "Commissioner Sean Davis is leading the audit team today. His son Ryan just deployed to Germany. The cold, damp weather makes his knees hurt, which makes him impatient. He drinks his coffee black with one sugar cube. Not a packet, a cube. And if you call him sir, he will spend the next 3 hours looking for a reason to fine you." Julian chuckled, leaning against my window frame. "I memorized the Federal Code of Regulations during my orientation. I think I can handle a basic inspection." I nodded, laid my security keycard on the desk, and walked out. The compliance floor went silent as I walked past. Nobody said a word. By 3 p.m., I was sitting in my truck in the visitor lot, watching the rain beat against the windshield. At 3:45 p.m., 3 black SUVs with federal plates pulled into the reserved spaces. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing with texts from Grant Miller, the operations director. At 3:55 p.m., Chloe Benson, the CEO's assistant, ran out of the front lobby. She wasn't wearing a coat. Her heels splashed through the puddles as she sprinted toward my truck. I rolled the window down an inch. "Harvey, please," she gasped, clutching the door handle. "You have to come back inside. Commissioner Davis is threatening an immediate plant shutdown." Julian tried to hand him a digital dashboard, and Davis refused to even look at it. "He's demanding the chief compliance officer. CEO Walter Bradley says he will sign whatever you want." I looked at my watch. It was 3:58 p.m. "How is that Stanford degree working out for everyone?" I asked. "Look, if you've ever been pushed out of a job by people who had no idea what you actually did, you know exactly how this felt. It was pure validation. If you've ever had to watch your bosses learn a lesson the hard way, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Let's get back to the story." I told Chloe to get in the truck out of the rain. She climbed into the passenger seat, shivering, her blouse soaked. "The commission is going to issue a Class 2 environmental violation under 42 U.S.C. Section 74(3), she said, her voice shaking. "That carries a $50,000 daily fine and a mandatory production halt. Our stock will drop 20% by tomorrow morning." "I know," I said. "I've blocked 4 of those during my time here." "Walter told me to offer you whatever it takes," she pleaded. "Double your salary? The chief compliance officer title? Your office back? What do you want?" I stared at the wipers pushing the water across the glass. "I want the chief compliance officer title, reporting directly to the CEO, not the board. I want a 50% salary raise to $210,000. I want my corner office back before the end of the day. And I want Julian Cole to be my assistant for the next 6 months so he can learn how compliance works in the real world." "Done," Chloe said immediately. And one more thing, I added. I want Eleanor Thorne, the board chair who insisted on replacing me, to apologize to me in front of the entire executive committee at tomorrow's meeting. Chloe gasped. Eleanor? She's the majority shareholders' representative. She won't do it. Then you have 2 minutes to explain to the shareholders why the factory is shut down, I said, turning the ignition key. Wait, she cried, reaching for her phone. I'll call Walter. 3 minutes later, she hung up and looked at me. He agreed. Everything is approved. Let's go. I walked through the double-glass doors of the Valiant manufacturing lobby, my boots squeaking slightly on the polished marble. The executive hallway was lined with managers whose faces were the color of chalk. They looked at me like I was a surgeon arriving to perform a last-second bypass. Commissioner Sean Davis was sitting in the main conference room, his arms locked over his chest, tapping his foot in a way that I knew meant he was about 10 seconds from calling federal marshals to padlock our warehouse doors. 2 younger inspectors stood behind him, looking nervously at their clipboards. Julian Cole was cornered near the whiteboard, clutching a leather binder to his chest like a shield. His tie was slightly askew. The moment Sean looked up and saw me, the tension in his shoulders dropped. Harvey, he said, his voice flat but carrying a hint of relief. You decided to join us. Traffic on Route 9, I said, walking over and shaking his hand. How is Ryan doing? I heard he deployed. Got a call last night, Sean said, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Says the wind in Germany is worse than the winter here, but he is getting by. He looked back at Julian. Your colleague here spent the last 20 minutes trying to convince me that the regulations for Class 2 chemical storage had been changed. He tried to show me a slide deck on his tablet. I told him he was citing outdated guidelines, and he insisted he memorized them last week. I looked at Julian, whose face had gone red. The guidelines were revised, I said to Sean, but only for Category 4 non-volatile compounds, and only after the facility completes the secondary pressure testing your office approved last October. Section 12.4. Julian forgot to read the footnote on page 84. Sean raised an eyebrow. You read the revision? I wrote 3 pages of public comments on the draft, Sean, I said, pulling out a chair. Now, why do we not walk down to the storage rooms and look at the actual seals? I think you will find our pressure logs are exactly where they need to be. For the next 3 hours, I took Sean and his team through every zone of the plant. I did not show him digital reports. I showed him the real-world safety systems. I introduced him to our line leads by name, remembered that the lead inspector's daughter was starting college next month, and answered every technical regulatory question without looking at a single document. Julian trailed behind us like a shadow, carrying my notepad. He did not say a single word. He watched me navigate a federal audit not by reading a handbook, but by knowing the people, the machinery, and the reality of the work we did. When Sean finally signed the inspection certificate, declaring Valiant Manufacturing fully compliant with no major findings, the sigh of relief from the executives in the observation deck was loud enough to shake the glass. Sean shook my hand again. Good to see you, Harvey. Keep these guys in line. Always do, Sean, I said. As soon as the government vehicles pulled out of the gate, CEO Walter Bradley pulled me into his office. He closed the door and leaned against his desk, wiping sweat from his forehead. That was too close, Harvey. You really are irreplaceable. We made a massive mistake. Yes, you did, I said, sitting in the leather chair opposite him, and now we are going to fix it permanently. Walter nodded quickly. The paperwork is already being drafted. You are our new Vice President of Compliance and Ethics. Your salary is bumped to $210,000, and you report directly to me. Eleanor Thorne is already informed. And the office? I asked. It is yours, Walter said. I told Julian to clear his things out immediately. I stood up and walked down the hall. Julian was in the process of taking down his Stanford diploma and packing his desk accessories back into the box. He looked up at me, his jaw tight. This is a temporary arrangement, he muttered. I have a degree from one of the best business schools in the country. They will not keep a high-paid VP who relies on handshakes instead of data forever. I stood in the doorway, my hands in my pockets. Julian. I did not survive 15 years here on handshakes. I survived because I understand that the rules are written by people, and if you do not understand the people, the rules will crush you. Now, your new desk is outside this door. I need the compliance logs from the last 6 quarters compiled and sorted by tomorrow morning. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he looked down, took his box, and walked out. I walked into my office, placed my leather-bound logbook back in the center of the desk, and sat down. The view of the manufacturing yard was exactly the same as it had been yesterday. But the layout of the company had shifted completely. I pulled up my email and began drafting a message to a contact of mine at the Federal Trade Commission. The board thought they had solved their crisis by bringing me back, but they did not realize that I had spent my 15 years watching them, too. I knew about the supply chain shortcuts. Eleanor Thorne had pushed for last year to inflate the stock price. I knew about the minor chemical spills that had been logged as maintenance events instead of environmental reports. The return to my office was not the end of the story. It was the setup for the real game. And the board was about to find out that when you push a man out, you had better make sure he does not know where the bodies are buried. The next morning, I arrived at 6:30 a.m. The office was quiet, but Julian was already at his desk, typing furiously. His hair was slicked back, and his double-shot espresso stood steaming next to his keyboard. He looked up as I walked in, his expression a mixture of fatigue and determined professionalism. "Good morning, Harvey," he said. "I have already started looking through our filing system. I noticed several major inefficiencies in how you log historical violations. It is a bit outdated." I set my briefcase down on his desk and looked at him. "Inefficiencies?" I said. "Really?" Julian pointed to his screen. "You keep paper backups of chemical safety data sheets from 5 years ago. Everything should be digitized. If a regulator wants to audit us, searching physical drawers is a waste of time." I smiled. "Julian, federal inspectors are often people in their late 50s who spent their entire careers handling paper. When they ask for a log, and I hand them a physical sheet they can hold, they feel comfortable. It shows we have nothing to hide. If I hand them an iPad and tell them to log into a database, they suspect we are hiding something in the code. Relationships are built on comfort, not just speed." By the way, Commissioner Davis wants to discuss the upcoming pipeline safety audit next month. He invited us to lunch at the diner on Route 4. "You will join us to take notes." He looked surprised, then nodded. "I will prepare a presentation deck." "Do not bother," I said. "Sean hates presentation decks. He likes to talk about the physical steel pipes. But since you want to be useful, go read Section 47. 3 of the new pipeline regulations before we go." He wrote it down quickly. "I will study it immediately," he said. I turned to walk into my office, then paused. "By the way, Section 47.3 does not exist. I just wanted to see if you would blindly write it down without verifying it." His face flushed bright red. He stared at his keyboard, his jaw clenching. "I am not an idiot, Harvey. I graduated top of my class. I understand logic." "I know," I said. "But Stanford taught you how to pass tests. I am teaching you how to survive a federal inspection now. Get those 6 quarters of records ready." At 2 p.m., my door flew open. Eleanor Thorne, the board chair, walked in. She was wearing a gray tailored suit that looked like armor, and her heels made sharp, angry sounds against my floor. Behind her was Sarah Jenkins from HR, looking like she wanted to melt into the wall. Eleanor threw a printout of the board agreement onto my desk. "This is ridiculous, Harvey," she snapped. "You are demanding a formal written apology from me in front of the entire executive committee? Who do you think you are?" I leaned back in my leather chair, locking my fingers. "I am the Vice President of Compliance, who just saved this company from a Class 2 violation that would have cost us millions in immediate fines and stopped production for a month," I said, "which would have knocked our stock price down by about 20% by the time the market closed." "Who are you again, Eleanor? Besides the person who decided that my 15 years of experience could be replaced by a kid who does not know the difference between a safety valve and a pressure gauge?" Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You think you are irreplaceable? Your contract is temporary. We brought you back to handle Sean Davis. Once this audit cycle is finished, the board can still vote to restructure the compliance department. We are already looking at compliance software systems that can automate your entire job." I reached into my drawer and pulled out a thick red folder. This folder contains the personal contact numbers, inspection history, and regulatory notes for every single field agent in the tri-state area. I spent 15 years building these files. I did it on my own time, on my own computer. It is not Valiant Company property. If I walk, this folder walks with me. And if you think a database program can take an inspector out for coffee and explain why a pressure spike was a minor calibration error instead of a major violation, you are welcome to try. Eleanor reached for the folder. That is proprietary company information. I pulled it back out of her reach. Actually, it is not, I said. And to prove it, check your inbox. I just forwarded you 3 emails. They are job offers. One from Pinnacle Industries, one from Kerr Manufacturing, and one from Summit Logistics. All 3 are our direct competitors. All 3 offered me the VP role with a starting salary higher than what Valiant is paying me now. They know the storm that is coming to this industry. They know they need someone who can shield them. Eleanor stared at me, her hands clenching into fists. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to control her breathing. She looked at Sarah, but the HR manager was looking at the floor. You are bluffing, Eleanor whispered. Try me, I said. I will see you at the executive meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. I expect the apology to be the first item on the agenda. Otherwise, I will be packing my box again, and this time I will be taking my files to Pinnacle. She did not say another word. She turned on her heel and marched out of my office, slamming the door behind her. I looked out the glass wall. Julian was staring at me from his desk, his eyes wide. I nodded to him. Get back to work, Julian, I said. We have a lot of compliance reports to clean up before tomorrow. At 10 a.m. the next morning, the board conference room was dead silent. Eleanor Thorne stood at the head of the long oak table, her hands resting flat on the surface. Her apology was brief, stiff, and clearly the most painful thing she had ever had to say. I want to apologize to our new Vice President of Compliance and Ethics, Harvey Vance, she began, looking at the wall just above my head. The board's decision to replace him was made without a full understanding of the value of institutional knowledge and relationship management in regulatory compliance. It was an error in judgment that nearly cost this company millions. I nodded once from my seat, accepting the statement without a word, but inside, I knew this was merely the baseline. Over the next 2 weeks, I took Julian Cole with me everywhere. I took him to every regulatory office, every warehouse audit, and every meeting. I wanted him to see how the system actually operated. Against my expectations, the kid was a quick study. He stopped talking about his Stanford credentials and started asking questions that showed he was paying attention. After a meeting with Inspector Marlene from the State Environmental Department, we walked back to my truck. Why did you thank her so much for finding that minor labeling issue on the waste drums? Julian asked, looking confused. Shouldn't we want a clean report with 0 findings? I started the engine and looked at him. Julian, Marlene has been a field inspector for 20 years. She takes pride in her attention to detail. If we give her a perfect report, she will feel like she didn't do her job, and she will search twice as hard next time until she finds something serious. By letting her find a minor, easily fixable labeling error, she gets to feel useful and document her value. But because she trusts me and knows I will correct it immediately, she didn't dig into the pressure log discrepancies in Bay 4. Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly open. They didn't teach us that in business school, he murmured. No, they didn't, I said. They taught you equations. I'm teaching you people. As the days went by, I noticed CEO Walter Bradley and the rest of the management team watching Julian and me with growing nervousness. They had expected us to tear each other apart. Instead, we were working like a machine, and that made us a lot harder to control. One evening around 7 p.m., I went down to the archives to look for an old permit. I found Julian sitting on a stool in the corner, surrounded by stacks of compliance logs from 10 years ago. What are you still doing here? I asked. He looked up, startled. I'm looking at the reports from before you took over, he said, gesturing to the dusty folders. The violation rates were high, and the fines were costing the company over $500,000 a year. I'm trying to understand how you built this system from scratch without a budget or a team. Why? I asked, leaning against the metal shelf. Because I realized my education taught me how to manage a system that already works, Julian said quietly. It didn't teach me how to build trust with people who have the power to shut you down. I'm starting to realize how much I don't know. I looked at him, feeling a rare moment of respect for his honesty. He wasn't just a kid with a degree anymore. He was a junior officer who wanted to learn the trade. "Come to the board meeting tomorrow morning," I told him. "You need to see how we handle the next phase." The next day, the boardroom was filled with the usual tension. Walter Bradley called the meeting to order, and I stood up to hand out the quarterly reports. "As you can see on page 1, I said, "we have completed our 16th consecutive quarter with 0 major regulatory findings. On page 2, you will see the violation rates for our main competitors, Pinnacle Industries and Kerr Manufacturing." Eleanor Thorne flipped through the sheets, her eyes narrowing. "Harvey, these competitor numbers are terrible," she said. "Pinnacle had 3 critical violations last quarter alone. How do you have access to their internal compliance data? This isn't public information yet." I looked her in the eye and smiled. "Relationships, Eleanor. Inspectors talk. When you treat regulators with respect and build trust over 15 years, they share information. Pinnacle is currently facing an investigation that will likely shut their main line down for 30 days. The room went silent. The board members looked at each other, the weight of what I had just said sinking in. I didn't just keep Valiant compliant. I had intelligence on our competitors that no market analyst could buy. But as the meeting ended, Grant Miller, the operations director, caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. He met me in the hallway after the board members had dispersed. "They're planning a countermove, Harvey," Grant warned in a low voice. "Eleanor Thorne has been talking to software vendors. She wants to pitch an automated compliance system to the investors. They want to cut your budget by 60% next quarter and replace your staff with a digital network." I looked back at the boardroom doors. "Let them try," I said. "We are ready." The day of the emergency board meeting arrived, and the atmosphere in the room was thicker than a humid swamp. Eleanor Thorne sat at the end of the table, flanked by 2 consultants in expensive gray suits who held matching tablets. When I walked in, trailing Julian behind me, she smiled. It was the smile of someone who believed they were about to play a winning card. "Harvey," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, "I have brought in some compliance technology specialists. They are going to show us how we can automate our entire audit tracking and regulatory database, saving us over $300, 0 Zen a year in personnel costs." I sat down and took a sip of my coffee. "How efficient," I replied. "Let's hear the pitch." The consultants spent 15 minutes showing fancy charts and slides of databases that could log safety metrics automatically. When they finished, Eleanor looked at me. "What do you think, Harvey? Can your physical notebooks compete with this?" I stood up and clicked the remote to display my own slice on the screen. "As you can see," I said, "Valiant Manufacturing has 40% fewer surprise inspections than Pinnacle or Kerr. And when inspectors do come here, they spend 30% less time in our facility." Do you know why, Eleanor? Because they trust the signature on the reports. They trust that if there is an issue, I will tell them. They do not trust a database. They trust me. But that is not the main reason I requested this meeting. I gestured to Julian, who distributed a set of sealed folders to each board member. "Please open them," I said. As the pages rustled, the faces of the board members shifted from boredom to utter shock. Walter Bradley leaned forward, his knuckles turning white. "Harvey, what is the meaning of this? These are internal inspection records from Pinnacle, Kerr, and Summit Logistics. They show systematic violations of 42 U.S.C. Section 7413, the Clean Air Act, along with evidence of bribes paid to mid-level regulators to cover up chemical leaks." I clicked to the next slide, displaying bank transfer records and signed statements. "For the past 6 months, the Federal Investigation Division has been building a case," I said. "They have shared these files with me because of the trust we have built over 15 years. Within 30 days, federal prosecutors will issue indictments. Pinnacle and Kerr will be shut down, and their executives will face criminal charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 for making false statements to federal inspectors." Eleanor Thorne's face was entirely pale. She stared at the papers. "How does this affect us?" she whispered. "We have 2 choices," I said. "Option 1 is to cooperate with the federal investigation. We share our clean logs, provide witness testimony, and secure complete immunity. In addition, when Pinnacle and Kerr are shut down, their government supply contracts will be terminated. We will be the only compliance supplier left, positioning us to win those contracts, which are worth over $50 million. And option two? Walter Bradley asked, his voice shaking. Option two is to ignore this. Install Eleanor's software system and let the regulators assume we are doing the exact same thing as our competitors. Without a compliance leader they trust vouching for our systems, we will be audited under a microscope. We will be tied to the same investigation as co-conspirators. The company will not survive the public relations disaster, let alone the fines. Eleanor Thorne slammed her folder shut. This is blackmail. You are leveraging confidential federal files to force the board's hand. I'm leveraging relationships, I corrected her. The same ones you wanted to replace with database software. I distributed a second set of folders. This is the restructuring plan for the compliance department. It establishes an ethics oversight committee reporting directly to me, gives me final sign-off on all manufacturing processes, and increases my budget by 40%. I need your decision by Wednesday morning. If you choose option two, my resignation will be on Walter's desk by noon, and I will be taking my files to the federal prosecutor's office. By Wednesday at 9 a.m., the board approved the restructuring plan unanimously. Eleanor Thorne was the only one who didn't vote. She left the room before the meeting was called to order. Within a month, the federal charges against Pinnacle and Kerr became public. Their stocks crashed, and they were forced to halt production. Valiant Manufacturing stepped in, secured the government contracts, and our stock price surged by 30% in a single day. I sat in my new expanded corner office, looking at the contract bids. Julian walked in carrying the afternoon mail. He looked at me, a new level of respect in his eyes. The Weber manufacturing contracts have been officially transferred to us, he said, setting the files on my desk. And the board just confirmed they are making the training on regulatory relations mandatory for all directors. I smiled, taking the files. Thank you, Julian. Oh, by the way, your 6-month assistant term is up next week. He tensed slightly. I've been meaning to ask about that. I have drafted a new position, I said, sliding a document across the desk. Deputy Compliance Officer. It reports directly to me, handles the digital systems, but requires you to spend 3 days a week in the field learning how to talk to people. It starts with a 6-month probationary period. Do you want it? Julian looked at the description, a genuine smile breaking across his face. I'll take it, Harvey, thank you. Shortly after he left, my phone rang. It was Commissioner Sean Davis. Excellent work, Harvey, he said. The industry is cleaner than it has been in decades. The Commission is forming an advisory board to write the new national safety protocols. We need someone who knows the reality of the plant floor. Are you in? I looked out my window at the busy factory yard below, where trucks were loading our compliant shipments. I would be honored, Sean, I said. When I hung up, I took the old nameplate from my desk drawer. Beside it, I placed the new one the maintenance crew had just delivered. It read, Harvey Vance, Executive Vice President of Compliance and Ethics. Not bad for a kid who started out straight out of community college. Vengeance is sweet, but the real victory is changing the system so they can never underestimate you again. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who only valued paper degrees, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable lesson experience has taught you that no classroom ever could? Keep building those real connections. Your experience is your power.